speaker today, I'll give a little biography on myself, is that my whole life has been as an editor and a writer, but there's one short year where I actually did environmental work with an environmental organization. I worked for Scenic Hudson, and I was the Scenic Hudson representative to the Hudson River Valley Greenway. And so a large part of what my job consisted of was going to meetings with villages and towns, planning boards, Greenway meetings, etc. And this was in 1990. I don't know when the Greenway idea first emerged. You'll probably tell us.
I will. I'll give you a little bit of history.
Okay. So it wasn't that old when I was working on it. There was still a lot of the big thinking was going on, and I remember being just stunned by this idea of a greenway, right? Which I'm sure you'll give us the history on even what that means, and that this was going to happen in the Hudson Valley, and the logistics of it was what really had me bowled over. Sort of working with private landowners, the state, county, towns, everybody had to pitch in to make this idea a reality. So I would sit in these meetings and think, no way is this going to happen. So Mark Castiglione,
yes,
right, is here to tell us about, he's comes from Albany, so he works for the state. He is the executive director of the Hudson River Valley Greenway, and he's going to tell us about how I was wrong, and in fact, it wasn't just such a pipe dream. So,
all right, well, thank you, Susan. And thank you guys for having me here today. I'm going to start my talk with a little bit about me, and then go into the Greenway, and then talk about the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. But periodically throughout the presentation, I will take a poll, and who knows where that view is?
Somebody said it.
Yeah, that's the view of West Point looking north through the Hudson Highlands. One of the most scenic viewpoints in the country, and it's right here in the Hudson Valley. So, a little bit about me. What is to give light must endure burning. I studied U.S. history when I was in undergrad, and then I thought I didn't have the patience to become a teacher, nor the money to become a lawyer, so I decided to become an urban planner. So I got my master's degree. The ironic part about becoming an urban planner is that you are a teacher, but instead of teaching students that kind of give you the benefit of the doubt about, you know more than they do, you're teaching adults who absolutely believe that they know more than you do. So there's a lot of burning involved in that. This quote is more about the Greenway and the Greenway's ideals, I think. Growth is inevitable and desirable, but the destruction of community character is not. The question is not whether your part of the world is going to change. The question is how. And this is one about getting people to care. And if they don't care, they're not going to care about the resources, nor are they going to care or do anything to protect them. So through interpretation, understanding, appreciation, and through appreciation, protection. The other part of the Greenway story is getting people to care about where they live. This one is my favorite. More than any other time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray that we have the wisdom to choose wisely. That teaches us to have a sense of humor. If you can't have a sense of humor if you're an environmentalist or if you're a planner, then you're in for a huge disappointment. You need to take everything with a grain of salt. You need to be conscious of the fact that you're not going to be able to convince everybody. You're not going to be able to have the world make sense of itself. You're going to be able to affect change in your world, in your space, in your time. I wanted to show this video. This is a preview of a PBS documentary that's going to air soon, that's produced by one of our partner organizations, Hudson. And I think it really demonstrates kind of the conversations in the background of the conversations that are still going on today that went into the founding of the Hudson Valley Greenway in the late 80s and early 90s.
When I moved here 14 years ago, I just kept thinking, why haven't people discovered this? It's fantastic here.
The Hudson River Valley is one of the most beautiful river valleys anywhere in the world.
I've traveled this country, I've traveled Europe. You know, people talk about the Danube being beautiful. I'm sorry, it's pale compared to the Hudson River. Pale.
This is a unique part of America. It's got beauty, it's got historic interests, it's got great architecture, it's got interesting little downtowns, and it's within a day's drive of many, many people.
1 in 12 Americans live within an easy drive of the Hudson River.
And so you have a tremendous cross current of people and culture. But there are tremendous threats.
You know, there's this idea that the Hudson River, the Hudson Valley is almost having a renaissance, but not everybody is experiencing that renaissance.
You know, my grandfather was here, my father, now me and my brother. You kind of want to try to carry on. But you like to get paid a fair price for what you do.
Within 6 months, we had about 8 deaths, 15 shootings. So if you take a pot, you put the top on in this tank, and you heat it up with boiling water, sooner or later, the pot's going to blow up.
How do you connect this great renaissance with these persistent problems that are still there?
Throughout the valley itself, I see old warehouses that hadn't been touched since I was a kid. There's a lot of room for growth and there's a lot of potential. It's just not being harnessed.
The Hudson Valley is asking, begging for reinvention. In terms of industrial production, we once were at the center and now we're clearly at the periphery. So where is our future?
Know your audience.
Every community is saying one word, jobs. They want jobs, jobs, jobs to come in. With that as a background, let's have an idea of where we want to grow our economy and where we want to take our region.
There was a time when the Hudson River Valley was a destination, and people came not just from the United States, but some from Europe to see this place that was so famous. I think we need to recapture some of that.
How can we make this entire region work together coherently? How can we make our cities vibrant and great places to live, great places for industry to locate, while we protect the rural areas, the working landscapes, so that that can be our breadbasket? These are all tremendous opportunities that can be secured at this time if people act now.
All right. That gives you some insight in the conversations that were happening, well, that have been happening for forever. I think the difference nowadays is that there is actually a buzz in the Hudson River Valley. There is revitalization happening. And I think that revitalization is sort of a function of the continuation of these conversations, but it also ties directly into the values and the mission of the Hudson River Valley Greenway. When it comes down to it, the Greenway advances the idea that environmental values and economic development are not mutually exclusive, and that by working together in a regional framework to protect the very elements that define our quality of life, our natural and cultural and historic resources, we can provide ourselves with a sustainable foundation for our regional economy. It's a simple idea, and there may be too much in there and too much emphasis on that, but I think we've seen the success of creating places in the revitalization of downtowns and how that impacts communities, how connecting people to the natural resources, connecting people to the water serves as a catalyst for community reinvestment and revitalization. We've seen that working with land trusts to protect the landscape. We've seen the benefits that accrue to communities. And so really, the Greenway is about both sides. It's about the specific policy and land use framework to protect the environment and to reinvigorate cities. And it's also about telling the story of this place. The Greenway is never going to lead our presentation with data. We will always lead with a story, because it's stories that connect with people's values. And when you connect with people's values, you make them want to do something about it. So here's the big problem in New York State. Well, I guess the big challenge. So there's New York State and all of our water bodies. There's the 62 counties that have their own jurisdictions. There are the 1,605 units of local government that are empowered to operate independently from one another with respect to environmental resources. And there are some water basins. And you see the obvious point here is that the lines that we draw on a map for ourselves have no relation to the environmental resources, which we all need to work together to plan for. So New York State, it's what's called home rule, empowers all of the communities essentially to say, you know what, you can do what you want to do in your area, these folks can do what they want to do in their area. Maybe we'll come in as a state with this sort of inadequate State Environmental Quality Review Act and try to do it reactively rather than proactively. So it creates an inherent challenge when you're trying to do things on a regional basis, when you're trying to plan for environmental resources, when you're trying to plan for regional trail networks or even economic development. So here's the context. There's the home rule, obviously, I mentioned. There's no coordinated state-level planning. In most states in the nation, there is coordinated state-level planning. Even in New Jersey, you know, the suburban capital of the world, there is state-level planning that says, here's our statewide plan. You local governments need to conform with this plan to, you know, accrue these, you know, benefits X, Y, and Z. There's limited funding for planning. There are a whole bunch of grant programs out there, but most of the grant programs specifically exclude the comprehensive planning process. It's one of the most democratic processes that we have in this country. It says each citizen has their own voice. They can come to the table. They can say, here's what we want our community to be in the future, and here are the things that we can support to advance that and achieve that goal. But there's hardly any funding for it. Fragmented funding and policies. Not only are we a state with no state-level planning, we are the only state that has environmental quality review that does not tie it to land use planning. The state environmental quality review in this state happens after the fact. I mean, it's ridiculous that there's no requirement for the connection between the policies that communities promulgate to regulate what happens in their communities, to tie that with environmental review. It seems ridiculous. The environmental review happens after the plans have been completed. It's not integrated at all. And of course, the challenge that I guess goes through a lot of different things that we do in life, there are lots of cooks and no recipe. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of the Greenway. You saw in the video some of the conversations that happened, but I think when it boils down to it, the history of the Greenway started with the Hudson River School. This is a painting of North-South Lake by Thomas Cole. And what's innovative about this is that not only is this our region, these places can still be viewed today, our natural and wild and untamed landscape inspired these artists, and their depictions really created a uniquely American, not only an American school of art, but a uniquely American appreciation for the natural environment. I mean, without their depictions, you know, and their inspiration and their appreciation, our American ethic that says that there are places in this country that are so valuable for their natural and scenic beauty that they need to be set aside for the people and the people's enjoyment. That started with this, and that started in the Hudson River Valley. So there are a ton of plans out there. And starting with the Hudson River School painters, followed through with, you know, environmentalists like John Burroughs, policymakers like Theodore Roosevelt, who set aside the Adirondack Park, put into motion the creation of the National Park Service, Hudson Valley resident. There was also tremendous advocacy. A lot of things were going on in the 1960s. The Storm King case, I'm not sure, you probably are all familiar with the Storm King case, established a citizen's right to petition the government for redress related to environmental decisions that affect the environment around them. Landmark case, advocacy of scenic Hudson, all of that stuff kind of culminated in you know, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, all that kind of stuff at the end of the 60s, early 70s. The Hudson River Level B Basin Study was an environmental assessment. All the way back in 1970, they had a Hudson River Valley study, and that study has actually established a Hudson River Valley Commission. So this conversation is not new. It just comes up and it's recycled, and it comes up again and again and again. So when the Greenway was started, All those conversations kind of came to a head again, and they did a study in the late 80s by the Hudson River Greenway Council to outline how we can address the issues of regional planning and what we need to do to plan for our environment and our economy within the context of home rule. So they had a study law in 1988, and they established the Hudson River Valley Greenway Communities Council, and the council was charged with looking at these issues and coming up with a strategy to deal with it, to deal with the seemingly opposing viewpoints that home rule is a New York State must-have, but it's also a must-have that we plan on a regional basis for our environmental resources. So they came up with the idea of a voluntary incentive-based process that does not impact home rule. The Greenway Act of 1991, the mission statement for the organization, which I alluded to before, was to continue to advance the state's commitment to preservation, enhancement, and development of the world-renowned scenic, natural, cultural, historic, and recreational resources of the Hudson River Valley, while continuing to emphasize economic development activities and remaining consistent with municipal home rule. Those two factors combined, talking about the environmental resources, the natural resources, the historic resources, but also explicitly mentioning the home rule powers that communities have, were important in the development of the Greenway and how we sold the Greenway to local governments. Today, the Greenway is organized in three big areas: planning, regional trail development, and we run what's called the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. The planning aspect deals with the very specific things that communities need to do to either work together or pass zoning or planning laws that shape the way their communities grow, where they grow or where they don't grow. The trails aspect, the big idea with the Greenway Trail is a trail from the Battery in New York City all the way up to Saratoga County. A regional trail network like that needs a champion and needs somebody out there being the shepherd of the big idea, and that's what the Greenway does. And the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area, we interpret the history of the Hudson River Valley so that people care about this place and they want to protect it. So here's the regional planning framework for the Hudson River Valley Greenway. No impact on home rule and no regulatory authority. Voluntary incentive-based, balances environmental values and economic development. It's a bottom-up grassroots process. It depends on communities themselves engaging in the Greenway process. We offer grants as incentives for communities to try to make better decisions in their land use policies. Everything that permeates what we do in the Greenway is shaped by the 5 Greenway criteria, which we'll get to in a second. And in terms of regional planning, the rubber meets the road at the Greenway Compact. It's a formal organization of communities working together to advance regional planning. If you sped the blinking up, it's almost be like a strobe light. No, it's no big deal. So here are the Greenway criteria. The Greenway works with communities and other stakeholders to advance projects that touch on one or more of these 5 criteria. But I think philosophically, the Greenway approach is that all these things interconnect with one another. There are things in different projects that deal with regional planning, economic development, but all these other factors, public access, natural and cultural resource protection, and heritage, and environmental education, come into it. So we really seek out the projects that consider all of these factors in the development of their projects. So the Greenway organization, the legislation created 2 organizations, actually. The Hudson River Valley Greenway Communities Council. The council functions like a state agency, has similar powers. It has 27 voting members, 7 of which are agency commissioners. It's comprised of representatives from the counties and the regions. It's comprised from various political appointees, from the majority and minority leaders of the Senate and Assembly. So the council is set up basically to advance the regional planning goals of the overall Greenway program. The Greenway Conservancy for the Hudson River Valley is a public benefit corporation. It's different, has different powers than a state agency. It's a little more flexible than the state agency side of things. Again, it has 17 voting members, 9 voting members. They have 4-year terms. So it's a huge board when these people get together in the same room. The Conservancy also has a subsidiary non-for-profit And the subsidiary not-for-profit is really handy when we want to go after federal grants or any number of grant opportunities that are restricted to not-for-profit organizations. It's through that corporate body, the 501c3, that we get our funding mostly that we use for the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. Both organizations, practical purposes, there's only one Greenway. These organizations, when they get together nowadays, work collaboratively, the staff is fully integrated, and they are the co-managers of the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area program. So I think I mentioned that already. All right, well, here's the start. Susan mentioned her work with scenic Hudson, the Greenway, in the early 90s, and there was a really kind of effort to start somewhere. The legislation that created the Greenway empowered the Greenway to do everything, and included everything in the kitchen sink for the Greenway to do. Create a regional plan, build a trail, everything. But you needed to start somewhere. So the Greenway just chose to start with these 10 model communities up and down the Hudson River. And these were the first communities to sort of drink the Kool-Aid of this weird idea that regional planning is a good thing, and that advancing policies to build trails, provide public access, and consider your neighbor in the process. These were sort of in the vanguard of that whole idea. So, what challenges did we run into approaching communities? And I've seen these lovely young girls at some of the meetings that I've gone to in maybe rural Ulster County, other places. But overcoming that myth, when you talk about a state-level land use organization or an organization that has to do with land use that's coming from the state, the big idea of, oh, we're the state and we're here to help you, that's automatically going to rub people the wrong way and leave a bad taste in their mouth. So when we had to approach the communities, we had opposition like, this is the state coming in, they're going to take our land, they're going to take away our home rule rights, they're going to steal our property, they're going to kill our children. Everything under the sun was hurled at the Greenway in the first iteration. So regardless of what you say, oftentimes, perception shapes the reality of the situation. And that was true with the Greenway in the early days. So we'd lead with, there's no impact on home rule. People would say that you're lying. We'd say, look at the legislation. The Greenway does not restrict hunting and fishing. People would say you're lying. We'd say, look at the legislation. We have a hunting and fishing guy on our board. Will the Greenway build a trail across my property without my permission? We'd say, no, we have no power to do that. And people would say, you're lying. And we'd say, okay, well. So those conversations and the trust-building process took a while. And these kind of projects sometimes take a while, and the trust really pays dividends over time. But it wasn't until the first flight of communities bought into the Greenway principles and were working with us that we could use them as our advocates. When people had questions and community had questions about what does it mean to participate in the Greenway, do they really take away our property right, do they really kill our babies, we would say, call up Catskill. They've been participating in the Greenway program for a couple of years. See what their experience has been and let that guide your decision-making process. So the phase one, which I was just talking about, the buy-in process, oftentimes it really loosens up and provides an incentive if you just provide some money. It's surprising how many people will invite you in their community if you say that we have money to give you. So we provide technical assistance and grants. So not only would we provide you with a small grant, maybe $10,000 for a small community project or a comprehensive plan, we'd send a planner in your community to advise that group in that planning process, essentially free technical assistance. In exchange for that, to be eligible for that funding, we asked communities to pass a simple resolution stating that they supported the 5 Greenway criteria, which is pretty non-threatening, and that they supported the voluntary process by which the Greenway Compact would be created. Again, non-threatening, it's a voluntary process, and it's optional. So that was the first step, getting communities to pass that resolution. That essentially got our foot in the door. It also allowed us to help communities plan in ways that were consistent with the Regional Greenway mission. Examples of grant projects. I have $800,000. That's the total awarded since the early 90s to Ulster County. But this is comprehensive plans, zoning ordinance, biodiversity assessments, environmental impact studies, open space plans, downtown revitalization strategies, architectural design guidelines, pattern books. It's intended to be a flexible program. Most planning at the local level in this valley happens at the planning board level. Planning board members are often volunteers, and they're lay planners. So if you're asking somebody to fill out a grant application for something, it's often going to be a volunteer. So we wanted to keep it simple, and we also wanted to keep it flexible. While our grant program is not a lot of money, it's often the first money in a project. If a community and a community group, an active community group, has an interesting idea that doesn't really fit the mold or doesn't fit within the program criteria of any other state grant program, they can come to the Greenway. We can work with them to get funded. Since the inception, the Greenway has helped to fund 120 comprehensive plans and zoning ordinance updates. There are roughly 270 communities in what we define as the Hudson Valley region. So that's almost half of the communities that we've been directly involved in to update their planning and zoning to bring it in line with the ideals of regional planning and the things that the Greenway likes to see. So we started doing it a little better. So by 2000, we had 107 communities on board. Dutchess County, which I'll talk about in a little bit later, actually was the first county to develop a regional Greenway compact plan and started working with their communities to bring them on board with that regional planning process. And today, the map has it's almost all green. Since the founding of the Greenway, we've added the originally excluded parts of the Catskills in Ulster County. We've added Saratoga and Washington County. And this is the only sort of state planning program that the citizens have actually lobbied their legislators to be included in. I think the other example is out in Western New York is the Tug Hill Plateau Commission. But these are grassroots initiatives. These are citizens saying, we like what's going on in the Hudson Valley. Let us be included in that as well. Right now, that number is a little outdated. We have 272 communities that have passed that resolution that are on board with the Greenway's planning process. Again, I mentioned the compact. Dutchess was the first. Putnam, Rockland, Westchester have completed regional Greenway compact plans. Orange County and Ulster County are in the process of developing theirs right now. And you're like, well, this has been since 1991. Why is it taking 20 years to get to this point? Well, I like to say good things take time. So step 2 is the regional Greenway compact process. The compact process is where the planning aspect of the Greenway program really, the rubber meets the road. It's not just a resolution. The Greenway compact process is a regional plan. And it's a regional plan made up by the municipalities that are participating in the plan. How the process works is that the regional plan is created by the county, working with the communities within the county. Once that plan is created, communities then adopt the plan formally with a local law into their local zoning and subdivision regulations as guidelines. That formal step of incorporating a regional plan into local zoning is almost unheard of in New York State. While the compact is guidelines and it's incentive-based, it creates a conduit for conversation between the communities and the county, and it also provides a policy framework for the state to interact with the county and the localities. It demonstrates horizontal coordination across the communities and vertical coordination from the local governments to the county governments to the state government. Since the compact and the Greenway was created in 1991, no community has ever withdrawn from the program, which demonstrates, I think, the trust that my predecessors and those that have worked on this project have built throughout the years. So the compact is actually, well, I'll just point it out. The compact is actually a plan in Dutchess County. This is the Dutchess County Greenway Compact Plan. You'll see it's in a binder. It's in a binder so it can be readily updated. And it's not really thick. I mean, look at that. Most of the plans that I see as a planner are like this thick. And most of the plans I see as a planner, nobody reads. Nobody uses them. They have no utility for actual decision-making processes. This has a lot of utility in a decision-making process. Why? Because it can communicate often difficult planning tactics and techniques easily to people, whether it's a planning board member, whether it's an applicant, whether it's a town board member, or whether it's a citizen. By providing graphically based guidelines, each one of these pages in here is essentially a two-pager on a complex planning topic. Priority growth areas. Explain priority growth areas in a two-pager. Very difficult to do, but this document does it. It also demonstrates how you can preserve farmland with development, how you can do infill development, how you can build greenways and bike paths, how you can do all those things in a really easy to understand format. And so when planning boards convene and people and applicants come into the planning board, they pull this out and they say, hey applicant, take a look at this. This is what we want to see. So that they're more likely to get proposals in 90% right instead of 90% wrong. And the power of the compact for me is its power to communicate those principles and those ideas to everyone involved in the planning process. So here are some of the incentives that the state provides as in, to encourage communities to adopt the compact. Obviously eligible for more Greenway grants, a 5% advantage on other state funds. Our Greenway grants aren't too big, but there are grant funders like state parks and Department of State that have hundreds of thousands of dollars to award. And in a competitive grant process, a 5% bonus can be really significant. Indemnity from lawsuits. If you're a community and you pass an innovative comprehensive plan and then you pass an innovative zoning law, like transfer of development rights or conservation subdivisions or anything like that, and a developer or property owner sues you because you did that, the state will indemnify your municipality because those things are consistent with the Greenway Compact. State agency coordination, again, that gets to the vertical integration of this process. And streamlined environmental review, question mark. The big idea, I think, for the Greenway was that if it was integrated into an environmental review process, it would streamline the review. In practice, that hasn't worked out so much. But what we do know about the Greenway Compact process and what does streamline the environmental review is the communication factor. Because if you have projects that come in 90% right instead of 90% wrong, the ultimate review process and your timeline is going to be ideally a lot shorter. So what is the compact? Again, it's not regulatory, it's voluntary, it's guidance. Intrinsically, guidelines and guidance are to be considered along with other factors, not applied inflexibly. So the compact document itself is something that planning boards and municipal governments can use to inform their decision-making process and to communicate what they want to see to others. Its options, it's essentially a toolbox. No plan can ever be the ultimate plan for everywhere. There's no one-size-fits-all option. The compact includes a toolbox of different options that can be applied to individual projects, whether it's in a city or whether it's in a rural area. It's cooperation. I mean, our home rule framework in the state empowers all the municipalities to create their own plans and establish their own regulations to implement those plans. The compact is where those communities come together. The compact is where those communities say, here are our common values, here's how we come together, and here's what we believe, and here's what we're going to do. The compact is pretty flexible. Each county has created their own compact plan that varies slightly. But the best ones include this design guideline template. So we're in Dutchess County, so I'll talk a little bit about the Dutchess County Compact. The Greenway guides that I showed you before, there are 20. They visually explain the things that I explained. In Dutchess County, 29 of 30 communities in this county have actually taken the step to pass a local law to adopt this plan into their local zoning and subdivision regulations. Again, if you don't know anything about New York State and planning and home rule, that's unbelievable in terms of that kind of thing. The one holdout is Stanford. So if you know anybody in Stanford, and I know the supervisor, she's very, very nice, and she keeps on trying to get it done, but she's not having success. Over half of the communities in Dutchess County have updated their local zoning and subdivision regulations to be consistent with the compact plan. So over half of the communities are now sort of walking in lockstep with this regional planning idea of the Greenway Compact. The coordination that's brokered by the Greenway idea and the compact has sort of generated a lot of intermunicipal projects. Communities working together that don't have to, but choose to because they know it's valuable. Here's just another example of a Greenway guide showing people how they can do development in a different way. Save farmland, build houses. Some people would consider it rural sprawl, but it's better than the alternative, I guess. Saving farmland with development explains simply how you can do it better. You don't have to build your houses in the farm field. You can discreetly position them so as not to impact the visual aesthetic of the rural character of the place, while still having the build out that you want to, with a smaller footprint, smaller environmental impact, except for the people driving to and from those places in their SUVs. But anyway, I live in a city, so I'm partial. Centers and green spaces. I think this is a draft Greenway guide, and it essentially says to communities, how do we build and grow our village centers in Dutchess County? And how do we preserve our rural character and our agricultural farmland? What do we have to do? I mean, most ag land is outside of a village. And most villages don't have the capacity to grow because they're bordered by towns, which are separate municipalities. So how do we do that? Streamline the process. I mentioned this before. This is how it happens most times. Developers propose projects, they pay for engineering, they get mixed reaction from communities, there's lengthy environmental review, confrontation. You know, you ever watch Parks and Recreation? I mean, that really happens. That stuff really happens at meetings. People bring everything to the table that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. Final decisions based on trade-offs. It results in a project that really nobody wants. The developer doesn't want it, but the developer has money in the game, right? So he's committed to not losing that money and committed to doing the project. So he's more likely to fight whatever compromises can be made. The Greenway process says, hey, let's take a look at the compact plan first before you do anything. Come into us, we'll have a conversation about what you want to do, we'll tell you what we'd like to see. So ultimately, that process streamlines the environmental review. So getting back to the Centers and Green Spaces plan, I'll give you a case study since we're in Red Hook right now, and this is what they did in Red Hook. I'd just like to point out that Dutchess County has one of the most robust and creative planning departments in the state. So you're lucky to be in a place right now that is so forward-looking. So this is the Centers and Green Spaces Plan map, and this is the town of Red Hook. The town of Red Hook includes 2 villages. They're separate municipalities, so they don't necessarily need to talk to one another. My favorite when I review comprehensive plans for villages is to see, or for towns, is to see the town planned out and then just a white space where the village is. Like it automatically, it deletes the village from existence in the planning process. But here they've taken a comprehensive view. They actually got together intermunicipally and said, hey, we have 2 villages, separate municipalities, and they're inside this town, and we all have common interests, we're all part of the Greenway, and let's talk about how we're going to build our centers in the existing villages and some other nodes, and how we're going to preserve the landscape. So first they came to the Greenway back in 2004 and asked for a grant. They said, we want to work intermunicipally to figure this thing out. 2 villages, the town, and a school district coming together. Why a school district? Well, you know, school districts in New York, more than half of your tax dollars goes to the school district. And how and where we grow impacts how and where school districts grow schools, or nowadays where they close schools. So in 2004, they started working on the Centers and Green Spaces plan. They finished it in 2006, and then the Greenway funded a fiscal impact analysis. They said, okay, here's our Centers and Green Spaces plan. Here are the scenarios. Here's the compact growth scenario in our village centers. Here is the scenario that will be built out if we are built out based on the current zoning laws that allow maybe 1 house per 1 acre. And here's the maximum sprawl scenario. So they wanted to figure out, well, what does that mean to taxes, individual taxes, but not only individual taxes, but what it means to public funding and public financing. Water budget analysis. You can't grow in villages, you can't grow densely without taking care of water. Not only water supply, but water disposal. One of the challenges of New York State's historic villages is that they don't have adequate wastewater disposal systems to allow for dense development. So they wanted to do a sewer feasibility study. And the Greenway funded a sewer feasibility study. It's not really an attractive topic for anyone, but it's one of the most critical things that shapes development, where it happens and where it can happen. And that was 2007. Based on the sewer feasibility study and all the other planning documents that these municipalities had, in 2008 and 2010, they secured $3.6 million in infrastructure funding to build it. I mean, without all these steps leading up to that, the town was not in a position at all to secure that grant. In 2008 and 2010, they actually passed the zoning law, transfer of development rights, an agricultural business district, and in 2011, they established a pattern book that outlined what the villages and what the town wanted to see when development happens. So here's the village of Red Hook and the town of Red Hook. Here's the village. So this is village-style density occurring in the town adjacent to the village, a separate municipality. Both municipalities passed the same zoning law, which is also mind-blowing in New York State. And this is a sketch plan of what a development scenario in that could look like with the zoning. This is another example in the north end of town. So village-style development within the village. You see preserved farmland on the outskirts. And that also plays into this, which I'll get into. You know you're talking to a planning nerd when you have zoning highlights. But I'll talk about zoning highlights. The compact obviously provided the context for this conversation to happen and these laws to be passed. A reciprocal zoning arrangement between the towns and the villages, which is almost unheard of. A transfer of development rights based on 1 acre zoning. And that means, well, I won't get into that. Incentive zoning, if you are a developer and you want to build denser in the village, it means you have to contribute to the preservation of land outside of the development envelope. So if you want to, they establish zones. The growth zone was over here where all the villages were, and the farmland that's preserved, you have to work with the farmer to give them some money so that you can build more units in this area. An agricultural business district. Obviously, farmers, and about half of the farmers in this case, were against this zoning because it reduced the number of houses that they could build in their property, which is unpopular. So to sort of mitigate that, they increased the flexibility of what the farmers could do on their property without any additional permits or any additional regulatory hurdles. So they could build new homes without subdividing, and subdividing is a huge expense. They could reuse their existing property for residential uses. They could build light industrial operations. They could have B&Bs, they could have wineries, they could have farm stands, they could have things that capitalize on the agricultural production. Ultimately, this process created 3 sources for what's called a purchase of development rights. Purchase of development rights is what funds that municipalities and others use to buy the development rights for farms. And development rights say that, well, we're going to give you this amount of money, and then you can't develop your property anymore. You either have to keep it in farming or keep it in the same use moving forward. So this created 3 sources for that. There was a $3.5 million bond that the community passed. There's a community preservation fund that was created by the New York State legislature to help fund the purchase of land. And then this transfer development right incentive also contributes to that. Yes?
I'm sorry, could you just explain what subdividing is? And why
Sure.
that is
So, like your parents' house is on a lot and you stop mowing when you got to the property line. If your parents wanted to build another house on that property, they would have to actually go and get an assessment and draw a line on the property and take it to the tax assessor and whomever and say, we're going to subdivide this. It has legal ramifications. You have to get approvals from the planning board, and you have to pay money for an attorney to do that process. So it actually changes the map and creates a new parcel where there had not been one before.
So it's like creating 2 lots within one green.
Well, they actually become 2 separate lots at that point.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, so the farmers didn't have to do that anymore. They could just build a new house on their existing property without having to subdivide. And for farmers, that's a pretty important issue because ideally they're generational. And they want to be able to carve off a piece of property for their children so that they stay close and they can still have a good quality of life on the farm. So that's the planning aspect of it. I'm getting close to the time. I'll breeze through this though. So then we have a whole other trail aspect. Does anybody know where this is? Probably not. That's the Corning Preserve in Albany. It's a nice stretch of riverfront path. The idea of the Greenway Trail is to build a trail from the Battery to Saratoga, but the idea of greenways are, I think, more comprehensive than that, and certainly more comprehensive the way we apply the idea of a greenway. Because a greenway is not just a green corridor, it's not just a trail on the side of a street. Greenways can be tree-lined streets in a downtown. Greenways can be pathways that bring you to the waterfront. Greenways can be blueways. Greenways can be water trails. We can use the water trail recreationally. Greenways are connections to transit hubs that bring you to residential areas. Greenways are pathways between residential developments and schools. Anything that provides walkability, whether it's in a downtown or whether it's a large regional trail network. So the Greenway designates trails. We don't maintain them, which is handy because we only have a staff of 5. Right now we have 750 miles of designated trails in the Hudson Valley, 225 about riverside trails up and down on both sides of the Hudson River, a 256-mile water trail that runs from Saratoga down to the Battery, and a few other trails, most notably the Walkway over the Hudson and that trail network through Dutchess and Ulster County. That's poised to be one of the most significant regional trail networks in the country. Anybody know where that is? You're looking at Bard right now. If you don't know where that is, you have to go there. It's the Catskill Mountain House site. You can literally drive up the mountain and go to North-South Lake State Park, get out of your car and walk to this place. And it's one of the most impressive views anywhere in the country, certainly. And that's part of the Greenway Trail Network. These are the kind of places we want to get people to experience and to care about. The water trail. The water trail, again, stretches from Saratoga to the Battery. It's a national water trail. It was one of the first 10 national water trails designated in the country by the Department of the Interior. That designation was just conveyed last May. Last May. So it's significant. And that designation has also already resulted in the Greenway securing a $90,000 grant for promotion and marketing of the water trail to make it more accessible to users. There are 100 sites along the water trail where people can access the river. In the late 80s, I think Scott Keller and our staff has been with the Greenway forever, and he works on the water trail. And there were something like 8 public access locations in the mid-80s that a person could go to and get into the river. Now there are over 100. And that's a success story that's not the Greenway success story. It's a success story of all the organizations that are working for public access, whether it's the Hudson River Estuary Program, Scenic Hudson, local municipalities. Our role in that, again, was to be the torchbearer of this idea of a water trail and be the conduit for those conversations to happen. I think the closest water trail site is in Tivoli South Bay from here. So, getting people out in the river, not only is recreation, but a river is a tremendous piece of history. This is just one of my favorite shots, the half moon and the kayakers going by. Does anyone know where that is? That is standing on the walkway of the Hudson before they put the deck on, looking down at the kayakers. So that's pretty high. It gives me vertigo just to look at it right now. So the Greenway invested in enhancements, working with the partners. We were not the only funder of these enhancements. The Estuary Program, the Department of State, But they involved, creating better access, making it easier for kayakers to get in the water. So whether it's floating docks, whether it's ramps, these grant programs probably range from between $25,000 and $35,000. But it was amazing the enthusiasm that municipalities had for these kind of access points. There's really it's a no-lose situation politically, providing people access to recreation. I'm listening right now to The Power Broker. I'm not sure if anybody's read The Power Broker, story about Robert Moses. And I'm at the part where he's building all of New York State parks. And it got pretty dirty. I mean, he's a pretty dirty guy at that point, but did the ends justify the means? And I don't know if the ends justified the means there, but what he knew was that the issue of parks, you can't be against the issue of parks. Parks are like motherhood. Who's against motherhood? Who's against parks? Nobody. It's the same thing with public access to the Hudson River. Nobody's against it. So it's a very easy sell. So some of these other amenities, kayak racks, kayakers, paddle into a downtown. They need to lock up their stuff because they spend hundreds of dollars on the gear. Thousands of dollars on the gear. That looks like it's in Bethlehem. There are, I believe, 65 kayak racks up and down the Hudson River Water Trail right now. Most of them are in places where the kayakers can go and enjoy a downtown, lock up their gear, and not worry about it. So that connects the planning and the trails aspect. Obviously planning needs to consider trails, needs to consider connectivity. And the final area is the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. And this gets into getting people to care about their region and telling the story of our region. So I have a video here, but I don't need to show it. I'll just...
We have time.
Okay, good. So this is the director of the National Park Service, John Jarvis. And he's going to be talking about and giving you an overview of what National Heritage Areas are and what they mean to the Park Service.
I'm here this morning in beautiful Waterford, Virginia, a National Historic Landmark and the center for a heritage area known as Journey Through Hallowed Ground. This is an opportunity for me to talk about how the heritage area system can assist communities in tourism and historic preservation. Some of you are probably wondering the differences and the similarities between traditional national parks and national heritage areas. In 1872, Yellowstone National Park was established as the very first national park, and today we have 394 of these units of the national park system that are managed by the National Park Service. Heritage areas are different. Heritage areas are community-based efforts that preserve and share stories about a region's history and character. Heritage areas contain a mixture of public and private property, including towns, historic sites, parks, trails, commercial districts, and even working farms. All these parts of the community join together around a common theme and promote the cultural, natural, and recreational benefits of the area. Heritage areas are versatile, inclusive, and dynamic. They revitalize communities, strengthen local economies, and create jobs. There are 49 congressionally designated heritage areas around the country. National heritage areas are not part of the National Park System, but we do consider them part of the family. The National Park Service provides technical assistance and works directly in partnership with heritage areas around the country.
I'm here this morning with Kate McGinnis-Wyatt, who's the president of the Journey Through Hallowed Ground Partnership.
That's okay. You don't need to hear from Kate. But that gives you just tell you what heritage areas are all about. They're not national parks, but they're still in the vein of the national parks. Indeed, the mission of the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area is to recognize, preserve, protect, and interpret the nationally significant cultural and natural resources of the Hudson River Valley for the benefit of the nation. For the benefit of the nation is the motto that the National Park Service uses for its own sites. When you walk into Yosemite or you walk into Yellowstone, you'll see the archway there, and it says this is for the benefit of the people. And it's the same idea, but heritage areas are inhabited landscapes. They're not carved off sections that are owned by the federal government. People live here. These are cities, rural areas, farms. So how do you do what the National Park Service wants to do, connect people with our national story in an inhabited landscape, and that's why they created national heritage areas. For us, it makes sense because the mission parallels so closely with the Greenway's mission of convening people, of thinking about this region as a region. Some facts about the Hudson River Valley, which you may not know: more Revolutionary War battles happened in the Hudson River Valley than anywhere else in the country. The environmental movement, environmentalism as we know it today, was established in the Hudson River Valley. The Hudson River Valley was a tremendous corridor of commerce that not only resulted in New York City being the capital of the world, but also allowed the settlement and development of the interior of the country after the Erie Canal was developed. Our scenic resources obviously inspired the Hudson River School, and they're continue to inspire us today. And the culture of the valley is unparalleled. From leaders like Franklin Roosevelt to the first American-born president, up in Kinderhook, Martin Van Buren. The people and places and events that happened in the Hudson River Valley really shaped who we are as a people and who we are as Americans. I mean, I can't overstate that fact. The Hudson Valley was in the vanguard of every social and political movement. The people that grew up here shaped how Americans thought about the world. So here's one example of how we approach interpretation and getting people to care about these places. This is a partnership with the Thomas Cole National Historic Site and a number of others. It's called the Hudson River School Art Trail. And this is a smart, oh, that's not it. Let's see. Oh, I got pretty fancy on that one. So this is a smartphone optimized website that shows you the places that were painted by the Hudson River School painters, but something went wrong. Let's see if I can, oh, drat. Well, anyway, the idea of this website is that you can actually go out into the landscape, pull out your smartphone, and stand in front of the view that was painted by the Hudson River School painters and see the various paintings that were painted by them while you're looking at the view. I mean, it's pretty incredible. We have these places all around us in the Hudson River Valley. We can't export them, so the only thing we can do is expose people to them and hope they come here to see them. We do also a number of other projects, like experiential tourism projects. So an example is at the Vanderbilt Mansion, just down the road. There's a Servants to Stewards tour. And if anybody's ever seen Downton Abbey, it's kind of like Downton Abbey. You don't ever see the front of the house. You go into the back of the house. And it was the first time that the Park Service interpreted at that location the servants' quarters, what the servants did. So instead of going into an old house and having somebody tell you how important this old candlestick is and who owned it, you actually get to role play. You actually get to be the first steward and the butler and the chef, and you get to experience what their life was like. You get to walk up and down the stairs. You get to hold the implements. You get to stand in front of the sinks. You get to see their quarters, and you get to experience what it was like to be them. And that's the kind of interpretation that we want to support, and we supported in partnership with a number of sites in the valley, because we need to move beyond the stiff and the cold interpretation that nobody really cares about. If you want to get people engaged in history, you need to have them experience it. So whether it's that tour at the Vanderbilt site or getting into a biplane at the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome, people need to experience history. So we support a number of events that allow people to experience history. And most of the events actually connect history with recreation. So we have the Hudson River Valley Ramble, which is our flagship event every year that we do, that connects people with the landscape, many historic sites, and actually provides a curated experience, essentially, to nature. Every hike is led by a guide that is informed about the history and the ecology and the nature of the Hudson River Valley. Cycling the Hudson Valley, partnership with Parks and Trails New York. They take cyclists down the Hudson River Valley over 5 days over the summer. Path Through History Weekends, which is another event similar to the Ramble. Hudson River Days, an event focused on getting people out into the river. And this program, Teaching the Hudson Valley, is focused on place-based education. And that actually connects students with the historic sites and the natural sites so that they can learn hands-on about this region and use that as a way to learn their curriculum. So look how happy these people are. It's amazing how happy people can get if you just give them a t-shirt. But these are our Ramble leaders. These folks obviously participate year after year, and they're enthusiastic about it. They want to share they're passionate about their place, so they want to share it too. But the Ramble allows them to be part of something bigger. The Ramble is our way to showcase all of the organizations and all the good things that they're doing in the Hudson Valley over the 4 weekends in September. Look how interested these people are. This guy's talking about edible, I think this was called edible Westchester. So he's pointing out mushrooms and little things that you can eat, which I would never do by myself, but if this guy's there, I'll do it. And it also allows families to connect with one another. This is sunset singing and song. So, mom and her kids putting on hip boots, getting into the Hudson River, singing, getting involved in an experience, learning about, those might be eels down there, learning about the ecology of the Hudson River. But this is what it's all about. This is what protecting and preserving our natural and cultural resources means. It means jobs. The Ramble generates $21 million in our economy every year. Heritage areas overall generate $12.9 billion in economic activity across the country each year and support almost 150,000 jobs. The Hudson Valley National Heritage Area, combined with the Greenway, supports almost 6,500 jobs a year. This is what I lead with when I talk to politicians about our program. Make no mistake about it, I lead with jobs and economic impact. They could care less about the planning nerdery I talked about. They may like some of the tourism aspects too, but this is what they like the most. And if I don't communicate this to them, they're not going to see a value in my program or what we do. So you can see the innovative approach, or the integrated approach of the Greenway. We have planning that deals with the specific land use regulations. We have the trails that connect our region together. And we have the heritage area that we use to tell our story and support tourism. And that's the Greenway in a nutshell.
Tivoli just got $7,500 in Greenway money.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, since that's a lot of these people live in Tivoli, can you tell us what that would be?
Actually, somebody just called me about that this morning.
Okay.
Tivoli recently got 2 grants. One grant was for zoning update, and the other grant was for trail connection between the village center and the waterfront. There have been some challenges with the Catspan people in terms of access across their property to the South Bay. So the call I got this morning was asking me why the trail had stopped being maintained. So we talked a little bit about the new grant that they had, and maybe that would be a vehicle to open up the conversation with the Catspan folks to grant trail access again.
I thought there is trail access.
There is. They closed it off a couple years ago, the last I heard. If it could be used informally, keep doing it. I mean, but that's kind of one of the challenges of those kind of projects, is that there are numerous property owners, and you can have the best trail plan in the world, but if you don't have willing property owners, you're kind of dead in the water. But it takes the constant conversation and the community enthusiasm to change people's minds. And trail projects kind of do that. So I hope that they take that approach in Tivoli.
But I think that, that what you're saying is that, I mean, how many students here know about the trail that goes from the middle of town to the South Bay? I mean, a lot of you know about walking from Bar to Tivoli, right? But there's actually a trail that then goes, when you come out of the Kid Lane, you can go back into the woods and end up in the middle of town. So you know about it. I mean, how many people?
I'm confused about where you're talking about. Kid Lane? The one that goes through the Tivoli base? Kid Lane, the one.
Yeah, you can walk from Tivoli to Bar.
Right,
You can
and then
also keep
you
going
end up
straight.
on, you end up on Kid Lane,
Yeah.
and you go back into the woods
Mhm.
where the Bellow house is there, that big house, and you go behind the house, and you end up walking through, and you end up behind Village Hall into downtown Tivoli. A lot of people don't know about that trail.
Yeah, when you're talking about a trail from the middle of town to the waterfront, isn't there just a road?
Yeah.
You just walk down the road.
You could walk down the
There's a
road.
dock there too.
The dock is not legal.
I don't know.
And somebody was killed walking up that hill in the dark, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure what their trail plans are, but oftentimes when villages and places are thinking about trail connections, they first want to think about off-road trail connections to separate the pedestrian and cyclist from the roadway traffic. You know, we know that human beings and cyclists have the same right as cars to be on the roadway, but in practice, it creates a lot of conflict. So I think that, you know, I don't know what their specific plans are, but I think they're focusing on amenities and how to make that safer. And it could be anything as complex as actually cutting a new path through the woods, or something as simple as better signage, roadway striping, or even you know, barriers to separate a pedestrian path along the existing right-of-way.
We just need to pave the path between farms, so we can like actually ride a bike.
Ride a bike there?
I mean, it's very steep though, even if you even do that.
Yeah.
There's a point where you're gonna be like.
I always walk my bike.
That sounds like a project people can get behind.
Yeah, that's good, that's good.
Yes.
If you see a sign that says private property and no hunting or trapping or fishing, or trespassing for any purpose, you can't go on that, even if it looks like a trail, right?
As your legal counsel, I would recommend not.
Okay.
But no, those signs are there for a reason, you know.
Because we have them at bars on the Tivoli Bays, in the Tivoli Bays, and I wonder like.
There are some. Well, there's the New York State posted law. If a property is posted, you need to ask the permission of the property owner before you go on the property. So there's a difference between the no trespassing sign and the posted sign.
Okay.
Yeah, so Bard Lane, you can go anywhere as a Bard College student, but that's just telling people that this is the this is our property boundary, and that's what that is, so that people don't particularly come there. And non-Bard people technically can be kept out of the Bard College property. Right? So if we decide to like keep somebody out, but obviously we can go, if it's Bard posted, we can go there.
Yeah, I recently noticed that there was no trespassing, hunting, and like just don't be here for any purpose posted, but then it said Bard College, and I was like, is that me? Like, can I be here? That's fine. Okay.
Yes.
I was just wondering, so I knew from last semester that there's individual projects or organizations going on in different places. Like Poughkeepsie, there's the Fall Kill project where they're trying to do similar things, like create a bike path or green area and cleaning up. Are you in touch with these individual organizations, and do you guys work together? Or?
Sure. I mean, what I think in Dutchess County, and the Poughkeepsie project in particular, the county planning office has a significant role, I believe, in that planning process. And they are the driver and the driving force behind the Dutchess County Greenway Compact. So all the principles you saw in the Greenway Compact that I presented are integrated into their planning process. Anyone else?
So, I mean, here's a question. You grant a community some money. And then, I guess, is each grant different in terms of sort of coming in and come into being or following through that the money is well spent? I mean, a lot of these, especially these little villages like Tivoli, it's not the most organized.
Well, they're all like different families, I guess. It's like, you know, each different project is like going to a different Thanksgiving dinner. They have their own particular dynamics. But, you know, we're there to help them. Some communities need more hand-holding than others. Some communities need more assistance than others. Most are able to pull it off. Some are not. We give the communities 2 years to do their projects. If they can't get it done within that time frame, we entertain an extension. And we figure out, well, what's going on? What can we help you do? Things often change that are beyond anybody's control that change how the project is.
I know we've been trying to build a waterfront park for over 20 years.
Well, you're getting closer.
Are we?
Well, I think 2 years ago, you know, they finally got an easement from finally bought the land. But is it going to be there in 5 years? You know, it's pretty low. I know there were a number of.
Oh, yeah, no, exactly.
I know there were a number of different proposals of going under the railroad tracks and then going over. But every community, it's a human right in New York State, I think, to have public access to the Hudson River. And any community that doesn't have it, there's a significant problem. And Tivoli is the poster child of remaining committed and still not being successful at it. I mean, 17 years, right? So, well, it's been fun if nobody has any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.